welcome to the first Aniridia Europe webinar. Good morning. My name is Ivana Kilsgård and I'm the chairman of the Swedish Aniridia Association. I'm also a member of the board of Aniridia Europe. There are about 100,000 people living with Aniridia in the world. And this week we celebrate the Rare Disease Week, tomorrow the Rare Disease Day. Aniridia Europe was founded a number of years ago with the aim to join forces of the Aniridia associations in Europe and the community, to bring awareness to the community and engage science and the medical community to work together and improve the quality of life of Aniridia patients around the world. This year, we are launching a set of seminars that are trying to bring together the community, trying to raise awareness, trying to also disseminate the latest knowledge and developments in the medical community, and of course to engage everybody to work together and improve the quality of life for the Aniridia patients. This first webinar focuses on Aniridia Net, and it is news from the frontier. And today we have two distinguished professionals and experts in Aniridia, Professor Neela Gali, which is from the Department of Biomedical and Clinical Sciences from Linköping University, working with experimental ophthalmology, and Professor Dr. Klaus Kursifen, which is the chairman and professor of the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Cologne. Very welcome. This is, of course, a live-sent event. So you will be able to pose questions during the event, depending on where you watch. Is it on YouTube or is it on Aniridia Europe website? And at the end of the event, or towards the end of the event, we will of course bring the questions. So our technical team, with the support of Lucia and Matteo, will also then pose the questions to our guests. And we are also recording this event in order to be able to enable other people to view the event later on. So before we start, we would like to show a short movie that was, of course, developed as part of the Aniridia Net project action. And it was, of course, thanks to Dr. Juliana Martinez Atienza, who is responsible for the communication of the action. And then, of course, with the support of Dr. Grubcheva from Belgium, and many people from the community, Aniridia community, they also participated in the movie, and of course, Aniridia Europe.
Aniridia is a devastating eye disease affecting 1 in 80,000 people. It is characterized by a complete or partial loss of the iris, causing reduced vision and increased sensitivity. Aniridia is more than a defect of the iris. Patients can also suffer severe ocular problems. These eye problems contribute to a progressive vision loss and blindness. Aniridia is a birth defect. Although the disease mechanism is not well understood, it is known that aniridia is caused by mutations in the Paxis gene. A non-functional Paxis gene can lead to a disrupted ocular formation affecting several eye structures. Aniridia is a rare disease, and this rarity poses important clinical, regulatory, and commercial challenges for the development of therapies and diagnosis techniques. Can present a broad diversity of symptoms, and given the lack of clinical knowledge about the disease, it is often initially misdiagnosed. Currently, there is no existing effective treatment or cure for aniridia. With the support of ongoing research efforts, things can change. can find more answers. We can provide solutions for them. We can improve their lives. With research, possibilities are limitless. Be part of the change.
Aniridia, it is a rare disease, but the patients with aniridia, they are not rare. They are just unique. Aniridia is a disease which is easy to diagnose and at the same time is very difficult to diagnose and also manage. The most important thing is our patient. So all our efforts are dedicated to allow them to have normal life. Without research, there is no future for aniridia treatment. Therefore, we set up a cost action, including specialists from all over Europe. And we hope that with our research, we are going to contribute to understand this disease and help our patients see better, feel better. So please help us doing this.
I have Aniridia. Together, we are stronger.
I have Aniridia.
We're rare, but together, we're strong.
Мы Аниридии редкие, но классные.
We are rare!
Контактуємось, ви зберігаємо. Help us shape our future.
Help us shape our future.
Help us shape our future.
Привет, я Артем, из города Мамги, мне 5 лет.
But together we are strong.
Help us shape our future. Shape our future.
Yes, and welcome back. And of course, Dr. Kristina Grubcheva is from the Medical University of Varna in Bulgaria, not Belgium, as I said before. Sorry. But now we start our little chat, digital discussion, and I would first like to ask Professor Lagali to introduce a bit himself.
Sure, thank you, Ivana. I'm working at Linköping University in Sweden, and my main area of focus is cornea research. So I'm interested in corneal disease, corneal wound healing, regeneration of the cornea, and of course, corneal imaging, and aniridia is a big area of interest of mine.
Thank you. Professor Kursifan, you also work with keratopathy and with many aniridia patients.
Yeah, also good morning from my side. Greetings from Cologne in Germany. My name is Klaus Kursifan. I'm a cornea specialist, ophthalmologist, and a professor here at the Department of Ophthalmology in Cologne. And I personally and our group has been involved in corneal diseases for quite some time, also especially in patients with aniridia. And we are happy to be part of this coast action on aniridia.
Thank you. Welcome. We could say, I think, that Aniridia Net is currently the biggest project in the world that focuses on aniridia. And it is really a great honor to be part of it. But Professor Lagali, you were one of those that also initiated this action. Can you tell us a little bit about the background and, of course, about the action itself?
Sure, thank you. Yes, first of all, it's really great to be here today with you and my co-chair, Professor Kursifan, representing the COST Aniridia Net. And would like to also welcome all the viewers today. So yes, this Aniridia Net, well, there was actually two sort of main reasons that it grew out of, and I'd like to call that the perfect storm that came together at the same time. The first was about 10 years ago. My mentor, Professor Fagerholm in Sweden, was asked to be a opponent on a PhD thesis defense, and that defense was being done by Ulla Idén in Sweden, and her topic was Aniridia in Norway and Sweden. And so after this thesis defense, Professor Fagerholm became very interested in the subject of Aniridia, and we decided to start a project on Aniridia in Linköping, and it just grew from there. We started looking at Aniridia cohorts in Sweden and Norway, and then it expanded to the rest of Europe. So I think one message there is it's very, very important who you choose as an opponent on your PhD thesis. The other event that came around the sort of overlapping with this was a previous cost action that was led by Professor Kursifan, and he will talk a little bit more about that. And that action was on corneal regeneration. It was just ending, and we needed to try to sustain all the knowledge that and the network that we gained from this. So we decided to choose Aniridia as a topic for a new cost network, which was subsequently granted. So this is sort of how we came, how the Aniridia net came about.
Fantastic. And you had one time you explained to me that you had a meeting closing this previous action, and then you chose Aniridia. And it was really, I think at the same time we also met and then started, you asked us to join the proposal, and that was really fantastic to be part of it, of this trip. But at the beginning of this action, there were about 60 participants. And there are many different types of European projects focusing on specific topics or like this cost, which actually has a different aim. So how many participants are there today? How many member countries are there today?
Yes, so we have today, the cost action has grown to, from the initial group of about 60 in the proposing group, we have over 200 members today, and we have 30 countries represented, so it's quite a large number of countries in and around Europe who are represented today. So this is really great that we could grow the action to this size.
What would you say, if you just summarize the expected results of this action?
Well, Aniridia net basically focuses on bringing together this critical mass of clinicians, researchers, but also, as you know, patient organizations and their members and other interested parties to work on. We have specific goals and deliverables, and we will try to achieve those during the course of the action. And the point of those is to ultimately improve the lives of those living with Aniridia. So, one of the big advantages of this action is that Aniridia is a rare disease. So we need to bring together enough people in order to work together to bring about change. So some of our activities, for example, some of these deliverables are consensus on the best medical advice for treatment, or documenting the quality in life situation of people living with Aniridia, but also technological advancements such as stem cell technologies or regenerative therapies. These are just a few examples.
Professor Kursifan, this is really, as Professor Lagali said, there are a lot of benefits in being part of this action, and you have experience from a similar action before. What would you say are also the challenges of being engaged in this kind of project?
I mean, it has pros and cons. This concept of the cost action is a very old, it's probably one of the oldest funding instruments of the European Union. And the overarching aim when it was established in the early 70s was basically to bring together people from all over Europe, and to bring together people from all kind of disciplines, and to basically support networking on a European level. And I think this has been very successful funding tool over the years. And as you mentioned, we had been lucky before in 2012 or so to start another coast action on corneal regeneration, artificial cornea, which also worked very well, and which was basically the previous coast action we were both involved in. And I mean, the benefit is that it's a very open form of collaboration. So you can have people from all over Europe, also from Israel, from several other affiliated countries. You can include, as you mentioned, industry, patient organizations. So it's a very open tool. It has the benefit to bring together people, to create new ideas, to train the next generation of students, of physicians, of researchers. The drawback basically is that it's basically also only funded as a networking tool. So we don't get really the money to do the actual research. So we get to know the people, we get to form networks, we get all the good ideas, we have involvement. But then we have, in addition, to be able to obtain additional funding to do the real work. So that's basically, probably Neil, you would agree that's a challenge, because this network is a fantastic tool. So you get a lot of new ideas and projects. But in the end, to bring them to the street, basically, you need additional help and tools and funding to make this happen. So it's a great tool, but it also has its challenges.
Yes, the main challenge would also be to actually proactively work for creating spin-off projects that focus on the ideas that are generated in the cost action.
Yeah, that maybe I can add something. That's something where Neil also was very successful in the past, because from the previous coast action we were able to get this Erasmus blindness large European Union project, which actually brought the money on board to do the actual research, and that's probably something we will also hope, or we already had some success also, so that this coast action is like a seeding ground on which other things can grow in addition in the future, and already have grown.
Yes, very interesting. And Professor Gal.
Yeah, sorry, completely agree. Just want to reiterate that, this is a very good sort of launch pad for new funding applications for the actual research. So I think the key with the cost is getting together the interested parties in a very specific area, and then they together will then apply for the research funding. And it's been a very successful model, I think, not only for us but for other actions as well.
Yeah.
Professor Legal, you've also mentioned that it also allows you to invite professionals and scientists from other parts of the world to different conferences, events, and so on, that can also contribute to the exchange of ideas, knowledge, and of course facilitate cooperation in the future.
Yes, this is true. Already we've had exchanges and discussions with our colleagues in the United States, in Canada, in Russia, in other countries. And I guess it's our hope that even this action will be expanded well beyond the borders of Europe. And I think there it's also key that the patient organizations, who also have a very broad reach today, can enable this as well and bring in those other associations which exist on a global scale. So that I think just the more people we are, the stronger we are, the stronger our voice is. So I think it's my hope that the action will even grow larger over time.
Yes. Professor Korsinen, there are a number of working groups in the action. Of course, the action cannot just be focusing on networking, but you've defined in the very application stage different focus areas that the scientists, specialists, and people that are engaged in the action can get together and discuss. One of them is the working group 4, which focuses on transplantation, inflammation, and immunity related to Aniridia-associated keratopathy. And keratopathy is a very well-documented challenge for Aniridia eyes. And of course, if it is mistreated, can easily also lead to blindness. But part of this working group is also to analyze best practices. How far have you come with this work? Can you tell us something about that working group and how it goes?
Yeah, that's as you mentioned, also one challenge of the coast action format, that you have a very diverse group and you have to bring them together into smaller groups which combine people with similar interests. And as you said, one important area is to translate also the findings which have been made into clinical routine, and that is usually done via clinical trials and by combining clinical expertise. And especially for rare diseases such as Aniridia, it's very, very difficult to define best practice patterns, because the published evidence is so limited, and everybody has his own experience and his own small horizon, and that's why I think the coast action is a great tool to bring together people from, in this case, all over Europe to share this. This is work in progress. Unfortunately, also like everything else, we have been kind of hampered by the pandemic in recent times, and the regular meetings. We had the last meeting, I think, just a year ago. The last,
Exactly.
I mean, in-person meeting. So everything has been slowed down a bit, but I think that's on a good track. And as you said, it's a very tricky area. We could talk hours about. But I mean, there are some key messages I would probably try to convey. That obviously corneal transplantation in Aniridia is a very challenging and very difficult task, not in terms of technology, but more in terms of outcome and of complications. So it should be only done it should be always only done in an individual case decision, only if really necessary, only if nothing else can be done. It should optimally be combined with a stem cell therapy before, if this is somehow conceivable, and then it should be done in any way in a lamellar fashion. So we should try to avoid to exchange the whole cornea whenever this is possible, only in emergency cases, and try to do lamellar repair surgeries where we only replace certain portions of the cornea. So the minimally invasive approach is always the best, and it should be always discussed in great detail with the individual patient. What is the expectation? What are the risks? What is the benefits? And that is a very personalized, individualized decision, and that's also making it somewhat difficult in terms of these guidelines to put this into a categorized table. I mean, obviously there are general recommendations, as I just made some, but that always will depend on the circumstance, on the age of the patient, on the environment, on multiple instances. But to come to an end, so we are I think we are on our way, but there's still work to be done. So, but that's work in progress.
Yes, well, it is exactly 1 year since we met last. And I can say that it is always so interesting, and it's a sort of a pleasure to be at these meetings and to experience this exchange of experiences, because that's also one part of the action, that you will eventually come with some sort of recommendation and best practices. But at the moment, since Aniridia is so rare, then the practices differ between different countries and different even within a country and with the different hospitals. So then it is also Aniridia conferences and the cost action. It's so interesting to see when you start discussing really these very practical medical treatment methods that work or don't work and so on.
I think that it's also interesting to mention, as you mentioned, we met in our last physical meeting at the end of February last year in Lisbon. Since then, we've had an online meeting via Zoom, and that happened in October of 2020. And I think there was about 40 people or so in the management committee from COST, just the management committee, who met, and there was really a lot of interest and engagement there. But I should also mention that even though we don't have the regular large meetings, maybe once or twice a year, there are a lot of smaller meetings and we have day-to-day discussions with each other, and we have a lot of messages going back and forth. And right now we're working on some important review articles, and what Professor Kursifin mentioned just about this importance of this consensus when there is limited evidence in the literature. This is sort of what we're trying to address now, and so even though we don't have the visible meetings, there's a lot of work going on in the background, and hopefully that will come out very soon, so that we'll get this important information out.
Professor Legali, there's one of the main working groups in the Aniridia net focuses on developing common clinical guidelines or recommendations that would be actually like they could harmonize both the examinations and treatment methods for Aniridia patients. And this work is led by Professor Dr. Dominique Bren-Morgignac from France, but it engages a lot of people and both many competences, and of course this is a very difficult work, as Professor Kursifin said, many articles, but again limited because Aniridia is so rare that one needs to take into account. And there are also representatives of Aniridia Europe that are engaged. So can you tell us a little bit about this work, about the progress, and when can we expect the guidelines to be published?
Sure. Yes, this is, of course, of interest for many different people. Yes, as you mentioned, Professor Bren-Morgignac in Paris is leading this work. And the goal here is to provide more of a consensus more at European level, because one doesn't exist today at that level, of best practices in specifically in Aniridia management, and specifically, as you mentioned and Professor Kursifin mentioned, because there is a limited amount of evidence in the literature today, but there is a lot of knowledge and expertise that exists in various centers, and this has not necessarily come out in the published literature, but there are a lot of practices that are being followed and good advice to be given and so forth. So this is what we try to intend to capture in this consensus document, sort of European level. This is important because, there is a lot of knowledge known about what interventions work and what interventions don't work in Aniridia, and it's important to communicate that knowledge. So yes, as you mentioned, we're working on this. We would like to get this done in a short time frame. Of course, as Professor Kursifin mentioned, the pandemic has sort of changed our timelines a little bit for this. But the goal, again, is to have this consensus. And as you can imagine, it's a difficult task to come up with a consensus document because there are so many people involved with different viewpoints and different experiences. And so this is a time-consuming task. But we are all sort of motivated to do this. So the goal is to get it done within the time frame of the current cost action. Yes.
Yes, and as I have also understood, there are many new ideas that are emerging as well during this process, and there's a lot of spin-off effect of that, new articles and so on. So as long as there is some action even partially coming out, or some results even partially coming out, that is of course benefits the Aniridia community, Aniridia patients. Dr. Kursifin, there's one thing about these European projects. Is also, it's not very easy to win. That's the first, there's a lot of competition for that. So one needs to also show that there is some innovation involved, that one is trying to also, of course, push the limits, develop new things and so on. And there is one working group that also focuses on regenerative methods, which I think many people with Aniridia are really interested in, is working with these instead of treating the result, instead of treating, but also working with regeneration so that we can back out the progress of Aniridia. Can you talk about a little bit about this work?
Yeah, I think there are several very interesting approaches in the area of regenerative medicine, also with a special relation to Aniridia, which are discussed and which are pursued within the action. I mean, there's certainly one very big aspect that is trying. So if you start with the corneal involvement of the disease, is trying to prevent the devastating long-term effects of the limbal stem cell deficiency, so the Aniridia-associated keratopathy. So working on prophylactic tools to treat the limbal stem cell deficiency, for example, via gene therapy or stem cell transplantation or other aspects. So that's certainly very interesting and also hopeful area of research where we would expect things to improve, not in the next year, but if you talk about a midterm perspective. And I think there are very interesting things going on. I mean, just to one example, which is somewhat related, in Germany, there is a clinical trial which is already ongoing where a special form of stem cells are transplanted, ABCB4 plus stem cells, which are thought to be not immunogenic, so which are thought not to be dependent on systemic immunosuppression in the long term, and which are generated from allogenic donors, so which would also potentially be amenable to Aniridia patients, where we can take the stem cells from the healthy eye to the other eye. So that's something which is already in a clinical testing period. Other things are very early on in terms of gene therapy on the cellular level, trying to prevent long-term effects. So I think that's a broad spectrum, and I think the good and as you said, the difficult aspect is with the cost action that it's so broad that there are a lot of things at different levels which all have to be moved forward and have to be brought to a positive end. That's a very challenging task for the action chair and the leadership team to put this somehow into channels which are coming to a productive end. But I think there are several interesting things which are going on and which will eventually benefit in the clinic.
Yeah, I agree totally, and I think also some of the work also that Professor Kursifin's team is working on could also be important, because this is to support the whole environment of the stem cells, for example. So it's a lot of work is going on into the actual stem cells themselves, but it has to also be realized that the stem cells are working in concert with the immune system as well. So immunomodulatory therapies are also important, and these could even range from just simple pharmacological therapies to promote the survival of stem cells, to, for example, dampen the immune response in the cornea. And there are a number of different approaches that have been used in the clinic and that could be applied to Aniridia. So I mean, these are some of the areas as well that we're also focusing on.
It's very, very interesting. Yes.
Maybe I can mention one more thing where actually, as you know, Aniridia Europe also was very supportive, is that it's also interesting to try to stop the devastating vessel growth in Aniridia, or maybe even make them go away, and that in the previous coast action and in the previous European Union project, we were able to show that certain forms of UV cross-linking can stop vessel growth, maybe make vessels go away, and that also with Aniridia Europe, with the help, we are now currently applying for a clinical trial in this direction, which would potentially also be helpful for patients with Aniridia to stop the vessel growth or make vessels go away. I think that's also a perfect example of how the interaction between patient support groups and research can help move things hopefully forward in the midterm or long term.
Yes, it's a very, very interesting. It's extremely interesting to follow. But there's one thing that is also very important, is to be able to diagnose in a common way the progress of keratopathy, for instance, for the Aniridia-associated keratopathy. And you have been working in developing these diagnostics for some time now. But it is very challenging work, as I understand. It's very challenging to define these protocols for diagnosis. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that, I think, is very, very important also for the patient to know and to, with security which stage the keratopathy is in.
So one of the things we've been working on with examining different cohorts of people with aniridia around Europe is to better assess the keratopathy, for example. And one of the sort of main findings we've had, and we've been trying to communicate more, is the importance of clinical genetics, first of all, because there are over 500 different unique PAX6 mutations that are known that these are causative of aniridia. It doesn't mean that there's one size fits all, and indeed we see that there's a lot of differences from person to person with aniridia in how their disease expresses and how it progresses. So it's very important to, one message is to have a proper clinical genetics examination done so we know exactly what type of mutation is present, because this can affect the prognosis. We could know if it's an aggressive type of keratopathy or not. Secondly, a common grading scale for the keratopathy is very important, and I think we're getting there. We're working towards that direction. Because I think we all have to first speak the same language
yes.
in order to be able to know what we're talking about and develop further. So the other point I wanted to make is that more of a realization is starting to emerge now, and we need to keep working on this, that the keratopathy is a lot broader than just stem cells and what one can see on the eye. For example, we know that there are problems with inflammation that are present. We know that the nerves are affected in the cornea. We know that there are tear film deficiencies. And so these all come into play. And I think we have to have a broader view as well of the keratopathy. And so diagnosis should involve many different modalities. So I think this is what we're sort of working on.
Professor Korsinen, you meet a lot of patients as well. So I can imagine that this would be very, very useful also to have.
Yeah, certainly. I think that as Neil said, it's I think one very big prospect for the future, I think, is the genotype phenotype.
Yes.
Let's say, individualized or more personalized approach that we really know what we are dealing with. That we don't have a big basket where we put a sign on, but we say, okay, this is this form, this subform. So that will make everything much more precise. And the other thing, as you also pointed out already, is that it also in terms of imaging and quantification, we are only at the beginning on how to image and quantify changes, both in terms of nerves, in terms of stem cell involvement, of epithelial changes, of vessels, and how to grade this and how to more precisely make a prognostic statement on this, and also how to base the therapy on this more individualized approach. So I think that's really, really only at the beginning at the moment.
Yeah, very interesting. Like I said, we in Aniridia Europe have also identified the genotype phenotype study as really our top priority because it would be very interesting to understand better the connection between these two. I think we go a little bit, time really flies. So I think we go a little bit about short questions, because I know that many of our members of the community are curious about there's some questions that keep arising, and that will probably be interesting for them also to get an answer to. For instance, one thing is that you mentioned this a couple of years ago, there was a common recommendation that even from birth one should use moisturizing drops. Just because there's a problem with the tear film and the tears in order to prevent the progress of eventual keratopathy. Is it still sort of a recommendation, or should one wait until they're really needed?
So we don't have the European consensus on this yet.
Okay, yes.
And I mean, consensus finding takes ages anyway, even without coronavirus. So I can only say what we do. So I mean, it's not really hard evidence saying that you can prevent things by doing this. But on the other hand, the children which we take care of, we still have them on some form of lubricating eye drops. Yes. Most of them actually, and a little bit depending on what kind of how the ocular surface appears, if it's more like the fluid phase, if it's more lipid deficiency, or both. So actually most of them are on some form of lubricating therapy. Yeah.
Would you say there's also many people use contact lenses, and of course there's latest recommendations that one should avoid them. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think contact lenses are good in let's say in an emergency situation, or if you have really epithelial defects, if you have corneal erosion, the contact lens can help on a short-term basis to calm things down. But in several severe ocular surface diseases, such as in Aniridia, also in GVHD after stem cell transplantation, there are more detrimental long-term effects of the contact lens. So that's certainly not something one would recommend on a long-term basis. What one can think about is the use of the scleral lenses, which are not directly in contact with the corneal epithelium, but they only sit on the conjunctiva. So you have a fluid pocket between the corneal surface and the contact lens. That's something one can think about, which also helps to correct astigmatic changes of the surface, especially after surgical procedures. But the normal bandage contact lens we would not really recommend on a long-term basis. But it can be helpful if acute problems arise in the short term.
And this is now the pandemic. Many people are wondering, should I really take extra care? Would the corona pandemic affect me in a different way than others? Have you seen anything of this that we could send as a recommendation to our the community?
There is actually something which is called what's in English? It's called mask-associated dry eye disease, which is, I mean, it's not a ICD classification yet, but I mean, it seems that wearing of face masks, especially if they're not perfectly aligned
Yes.
to the nose here, that you have constant blowing of air in a non-conventional way, that can aggravate a dry eye, which is anyway present in Aniridia or in other patients. And additionally, it can also increase with, that seems to be true for contact lens patients, it seems to be able to increase the risk of infectious diseases of the ocular surface, because you constantly blow bacteria from the nose onto the ocular surface. So I would probably advocate a little bit more aggressive lubrication of the surface, and to be especially careful if there are defects of the ocular surface, or if somebody is using or has to use contact lenses. I think that would probably be the one recommendation to give. Yeah. And if possible, wear glasses, because we have learned that wearing glasses reduces the risk of a coronavirus infection statistically, because obviously not so many viruses land on the ocular surface and are then drained through the nose to the pharynx and cannot cause infection. So wearing glasses actually seems to be protective.
This is very, very useful. Thank you so much. Professor Lagali, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I think something also that's come to light in the pandemic time, and this is generally not only in the Aniridia population, is that we've seen a lot of increased screen viewing time during the pandemic, and so this is something to keep in mind as well, because it's generally, bad for eye health with extended screen viewing time, and one could imagine in the Aniridia population who are already predisposed, for example, to dry eye. That this could be particularly important to keep in mind, especially for children. A lot of children tend to spend a lot of time on screens as well, so something to keep in mind.
Yes, I fully agree. I can see with my son that the screen time has increased, so But before we let in the questions from the audience, just one more question to Professor Lagali. Of course, the Aniridia Europe and the patient organizations are involved in this action. And as I said before, it was really a dream come true to be able to join the proposal in the beginning. And of course, when it was approved, it was really, it's fantastic. But there are also some challenges. How do you experience this cooperation?
Yes, of course. There are always challenges. I mean, there's challenges on multiple levels because, of course, we are located physically in different places. We do things in different ways, have different priorities and so forth. But I think it's just a matter of we have to keep the momentum going. And so far it's been very good. Keep the motivation going even in this pandemic time. And I think some of these common projects are really helping to do that because we really need the input of many different experts. And so they have been willing to give us their time and expertise. And I think this is a big, we have to give a big call out to all the participants in our cost action who have been really dedicating a lot of time to helping us achieve our goals during the pandemic. So that's, even though it's always a challenge to have a large network to accomplish concrete goals, I think many of our members are very dedicated in this way. So we're very pleased about this.
Yes, it is nice. We'll see if Matteo can join us. Lucia and Matteo have been working in the background, collecting questions.
Good morning, all. Thanks,
Good
Ivana.
morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
So, from the audience, there are some questions that were coming, but more or less you have already answered. However, one of them is corneal transplantation. How successful are they in this moment, and which moisturizing drops are recommended to use, or what else is there to be done about the dryness of eye, and about this also in this period, as you were saying before, in the COVID-19 period?
So maybe I start with the last question. So in terms of treating the dry eye in Aniridia, there are also some general guidelines which one probably should follow. One is obviously not to use, always to use preservative-free eye drops. So no eye drops which contain preservatives, because they can aggravate the damage to the ocular surface further. Then the other guideline is to try to combine eye drops which replace different layers of the tear film. So it's always good to combine, for example, a hyaluronic acid component of the exchanging the water layer, and combine it with something which replaces the lipid layer on the top of the tear film. And the third advice would be to combine this usually with some form of ointment in the evening to protect the ocular surface overnight, which can also be something more viscous. In addition, I think we touched this, or Neil touched this before briefly. Obviously, it's on the long term also good to think about additional approaches for the ocular surface changes, and that is in terms of how can we reduce the inflammatory changes, and that can be on a short term topical steroids, but that's no long-term therapy. Long-term therapy can be done with topical cyclosporin A eye drops, which can be given also already in childhood, and it can be used to reduce the inflammation of the ocular surface. And the third aspect, which also Neil mentioned before, is that we come to know that there are also changes in corneal nerves in aniridia corneas, and that can be addressed, for example, with serum eye drops, or with, again, we had very new development in several European countries with very highly viscous hyaluronic acid eye drops, which also seem to have neuroprotective or neuro supportive effects. So this would be the three approaches targeting the tear film or supporting the tear film instability, anti-inflammatory therapy, and then approaches for strengthening the corneal nerves, be it with serum eye drops or with other tear replacement drops, which are more viscous than before.
Very interesting. There was one more question with respect to transplantation, I think, Matteo? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There was a question about how it is going the result from the corneal transplantation. What are the best practices to follow in this moment under the surgeon point of view?
That's also something which we try to find a consensus on, but I mean, to say in general, it's very difficult. The prognosis is very difficult especially for penetrating keratoplasty, because we have inflammation, we have stem cell deficiency, we have a very inflammatory milieu. So that should be avoided, I think, whenever possible. What one can do certainly is, especially in central areas of opacification, is to perform surface therapies like lamellar keratectomy, removing of superficial scarring tissue. This can be combined with amniotic membrane transplantation, which is also an approach to stabilize the surface, to regenerate corneal nerves. And that is, I think, a valid approach which can be discussed on an individualized basis to remove central superficial scarring. This can be combined topically with local anti-VEGF therapy on a short term. That's one approach. The other approach which can also be discussed is to perform superficial exchanges of tissues if there is superficial scarring with vascularization. This can be done with a relatively good risk-benefit ratio. What I would avoid, as mentioned, is to perform penetrating keratoplasty unless it's some way in combination with the limbal stem cell transplantation, because we know that the prognosis is very, very guarded. What a relatively new development is on top of this is the use of the artificial cornea, like the Boston keratoprosthesis. That's in itself not something new, which it has been around for 40 years or so. But there are some relatively recent studies showing that also in eyes with aniridia, which are very challenging in this aspect of transplantation, the artificial cornea can provide at least some form of visual acuity centrally, and with all the risks of this artificial cornea, that has to be very precisely discussed on an individualized patient basis. Artificial corneas can be a way to give some form of visual acuity on a medium-term range. So that's certainly nothing which we would recommend children or young patients, but that's something which can be discussed for older patients to improve vision. And the outcomes are relatively good with all the, as I said, with all the risk which have to be discussed. But that's at least one new, relatively new option, yeah.
Instead, always from the audience, but from an external point of view, from the cornea, so about the contact lenses, there are two questions that we can summarize in one. So the topic is how the long-term use of contact lenses can impact on the cornea, and what can we do to solve or improve or benefit the status of the cornea, starting from the fact that the Aniridia people need to use these contact lenses, and always about contact lenses, what do you think about the use of the therapeutic lenses always in long-term use?
I mean, as said before, there are detrimental or there are negative side effects of the long-term use of contact lens overall, and especially in eyes which are having difficulties anyway, like in Aniridia, that is, you get more damage to the nerve, you get more inflammation, you get more dry eye. So there are negative effects. As I said before, that has to be balanced on an individual basis. So what are the benefits and the risks? And if the decision is made that it's necessary to wear contact lens both on a therapeutic level or also on an optical level, then one should try to at least minimize the risks which are associated with it. And that means that one should obviously take care with the hygiene of the contact lens, but also do everything what is possible to stabilize the surface. And that is to combine the contact lens then with proper artificial tears, with proper anti-inflammatory therapy, for example, also long-term anti-inflammatory therapy with cyclosporin eye drops, and potentially also something which stabilizes the corneal nerve. So do as much as possible to stabilize the surface if contact lenses have to be worn on the long term.
Last question from our audience is about COVID-19 and the possibility or impossibility to reach good doctors or good therapies to fix problems like the dryness of eye with the masks. So according to you both, what could be the 3 advices to monitor or check the situation of eyes in aniridiac people in this period?
So, I mean, if you don't have access to the eye care doctor in person, which in some parts of Europe may be the case in the moment, I mean, obviously one option would be to try to have online consultations or video consultations. That is an option, at least in Germany and in some parts of Europe, that can help. And otherwise, I mean, that the best is probably to maximize the therapy you already have at the moment in terms of lubrication, and hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel in the relatively near future in most countries in Europe. I hope so, at least.
Thank you so much, Ivana. I leave you the word.
Thank you. Professor Lagalli, would you like to add something?
No, I think Professor Kursifen has summed up very well. Yeah.
Well, time is really flying, and we soon need to start wrapping up. But I am really interested about the future. And if we look in the past, one of the spheres of medicine that has developed really among the fastest is ophthalmology. What would you expect in 10 years' time that we have achieved? And this is a question to you both.
Okay, I'll take it first, I guess. Yeah, so I think, and this is something we're working towards today, I think in 10 years, and it's been improving over the last few years, I think we'd like to see Aniridia as established as a well-known clinical entity among doctors everywhere. Also, the next generation of younger clinicians and researchers, that they're aware of Aniridia, and that they are working on new techniques to manage the disease in the best way possible. So I'd like to see that sort of even improving in the next 10 years, so that it's still a rare disease, but not an unknown disease by any means. And then I think there's some very exciting developments that I think we will see some improvements in the 10-year time frame. And we're already starting to see some first indications, that these could be new potential drugs, potential cellular cell therapies, or as Professor Kurnsipin talked about before, regenerative therapies that could perhaps halt the disease, at least the keratopathy, and try to preserve a good level of vision. So I think, there are some really exciting developments, and I hope in 10 years we'll really have approved therapies for aniridia, for the keratopathy. Klaus, would you like to add anything?
I think I would only completely agree, and I hope that, as we all know, I mean, in research, you always have to try 100 times to be successful one time, or not, maybe not that much, but that at least one or two of the very promising approaches will make it to the clinical routine in 10 years. But I'm very optimistic about this.
I was like asking one question because it starts sort of developing the thoughts. Is if we're going to really reach and get there, what do we need to do more of, and what should we do less of?
Well, one thing I think we can do more of is what we're doing now, for example, with the cost action, that this really critical mass has to be sustained. And I think even now we should be looking for ways to continue past the duration of this cost action, see how can we keep this this group or this sort of massive expertise going beyond. So this is something we really should be looking at, I think, as one thing. Would you like to add anything, Klaus?
I think that's really the main challenge in the next 1 or 2 years, to be able to find a structure on the European level, preferably where we can, as you said, maintain this fascinating group of expertise, of knowledge, of exchange, and keep going. So probably that's the challenge for the next 1 or 2 years, to find a suitable tool to continue this endeavor.
Ivana, if I can, there is another question from our audience that is related to sunglasses. So how is the benefit that they bring to people outside and inside? And if is better to keep them also inside, for example, in your house or in other spaces inside?
We can start. I mean, if you talk about sunglasses outside, obviously in terms of UV protection, that is certainly something which is conceptually beneficial for the ocular surface anyway, and especially if it's a endangered ocular surface, because we know that UV light is damaging to limbal stem cells anyways. So that's, I would say, certainly beneficial. Although I'm not sure that we really have very hard scientific evidence for that. But I mean, concluding from other aspects, you would say it's beneficial. Inside, I think it's only helping potentially to reduce stray light or other irritating effects, and that is basically on the individual level. So if you think that it helps you, so it makes vision more comfortable, yes, and if not, then no. So I think that would, in my opinion, that's really something on the individual level which has to be decided.
And another question is about...
Matteo, just a second. I think, Professor Lagalli, do you have a response to that?
I would just like to point out or ask Professor Kursifen, what about for youngsters with whose eyes are still developing? Would there be any sort of recommendations for that? I mean, the importance of light, natural light, could this affect the decision to wear sunglasses?
It's a tricky question, because we know that we need, or our eyes need, in the first years a certain degree of UV light to reach the normal for normal eye development. So if you don't have enough UV light because children are too much inside and stick too much to the smartphone, then they get elongated eye growth, they get myopic, And so that there's a fine balance. We don't need we don't want too much UV light because that can harm the ocular surface. But we also want children, especially, to be outside to get some form of UV light. But the UV light we need, or the eyes of the children need for normal eye development, that's something which you can even reach on a cloudy day. So you don't need full screen sunshine. That's even sufficient if you're outside on a not on a rainy day, but on a cloudy day. So I think if you recommend sunglasses in heavy sunshine, or if you're in the mountains or at the seaside, I think that's better, because then you protect from heavy UV exposure. But normally it's not necessary, because then you get the sufficient UV light which we need for eye growth development.
And would you say also that it's important to, I mean, the outdoors also could be important for being able to focus to objects at a long distance, which one maybe doesn't get a chance to do if you're inside or looking at a screen at short distance?
Yeah, I mean that's something which we have learned from the Asian countries, which have much more problems with myopia as we have here in Europe. That they, like in Taiwan, they have implemented that school children now are two hours per day they have to spend outside in the schoolyard, not playing with the smartphone, and this has over the years dramatically reduced the myopia progression rate in these countries. So I think both in terms of stabilizing the tear film, both in terms of normal eye development, spending time outside is especially for children, it's highly recommended. Yeah.
I can also just add, I work in the building industry, and there's actually also a big problem indoors depending on the light bulbs, because some of the light bulbs actually do emit UV rays. So one should be aware, of course, also which one to choose, or to maybe have also some sort of a UV filter for that. And, yeah.
And there is another question from our audience, and is about the problem of thinning of the cornea, and what is causing it, and what is there to be done about it?
Difficult question. So I mean that there are several reasons. Maybe Neil can add on this from the experimental level, but I mean there's certainly inflammation, and on the long-term inflammatory changes in the cornea can lead to degradation of the corneal stroma. So what can we do prophylactically? Certainly to reduce the level of inflammation, as you said before, with topical and anti-inflammatory therapy. Potentially in the long term, I mentioned this clinical trial on UV cross-linking. We can also do we can also use other approaches to stabilize the corneal stroma against melting-induced thinning, but that is it's early development.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think what we see on the experimental side is, of course this is noted in patients as well, that when you have a defect, an epithelial defect, of course this could be a trigger leading to thinning. So supporting the healing of, for example, erosions and so forth, supporting the healing of that is important, as well as we see that if the cornea is denervated, so deficit of nerves, this also is another triggering effect that can lead to thinning of the cornea. So again, as Professor Kausik was mentioning, any therapies that will be there to support the nerves and the epithelium and the wound healing would be beneficial to try to limit or prevent melting.
Making a step back, there is another question about the lightnings, and so what do you think about the screens like, I don't know, smartphones, tablet, PC and other things like that for the people with an higher age, so I think to workers and similar, and Dell is asking us if there are if these kind of screens can create some images to eyes and what they can do, because mostly with COVID-19 they, for example, are in smart working and they need to work a lot directly on the PC for long hours.
So I mean, I think that one can take the fear away that the light which is emitted from the screen, be it from the smartphone or be it from the laptop, is somehow damaging to the eye. So there is that is not a realistic fear. What in fact can happen, as we discussed before, is that if you work at a near distance, be it at a smartphone or a laptop or whatever, and if you focus for long times, your eyes get dry because you are working very focused. Your blinking rate is going down, and that's why we have this office eye syndrome, where people working inside with dry air, focusing on smartphones or laptops, have increased rate of dry eye. So that's certainly a concern in the COVID-19 pandemic, because people are stuck to the smartphone or laptop work, but it's not the light itself does not seem to be damaging to the eye. So there's also no point in using these filters at smartphones for blue light or so. That's not really evidence-based. But I mean, taking a break, looking in the distance, or adding more tear film supplements, that's probably the way to go, and to go outside in between.
Thank you.
I agree. I just say, what Professor Carlson mentioned. Also, taking a break is a very good recommendation, and to focus, because when we're focusing on a near distance, we are straining the muscle, so the ciliary muscle. So in order to have release that and have a proper accommodation, it's really important to look in the distance. I think the recommendation is every 20 minutes or something to look for about 30 seconds at a further distance, and of course, as you mentioned, going outside, very beneficial as well.
We have been talking for now more than an hour about Aniridia Net, and Aniridia Net will continue, and we are about in the middle of the action, but what can we expect now in the shortest period of time? What are the next steps of Aniridia Net?
Well, the work is continuing. We have concrete goals. For example, as we mentioned, this consensus, to have some kind of clinical consensus. And we see here, again, with the questions from the audience, that it is really important to develop a consensus among experts on recommendations in the absence of large studies. So that's something we're continuing on. Register studies is an area of interest as well. There are a number of European level or national level registers in Europe, and one of our goals is to combine the evidence based on Aniridia from these various registers and see what kind of conclusions we can draw from patients who have already been treated. So that's another area as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we are working on some important review articles, which also is not just a review, but it also extends this to drawing important conclusions and recommendations and suggesting new areas for new research as well. So these are continuing as well. Would you like to add anything, Klaus?
I only want to add that we hope for in-person meetings in the near future to speed things up, and also to it's a different exchange on the screen than if you meet in person. So we are in progress, but we hope we can progress differently in the near future.
Yes, definitely. But at least until then, this was really a fantastic way to have you and to talk to you about Aniridia Net, to exchange some also information and also disseminate information to our patients and the community. I would like to thank you very much, both for your time and of course your engagement and for your participation in this event.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank our technical team that actually was working behind Matteo and Lucia, Irma and Tord that made all this possible. So I really hope that you will join us also at our next webinar, which will be now in the spring. Happy Rare Disease Day tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.